Welcome to Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all-new episode of Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense with Don Lank and Kathleen Salas-Bass over at KLB Benefits Law Group. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Don and Kathleen, they've been helping employers and benefit plan service providers navigate the complex legal requirements of employee benefit plans. They've got decades of experience in this space with employee benefits law. They've been guiding clients through compliance matters, corrections, and even IRS and Department of Labor audits. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity in employee benefit plans. Don's going to explain why it matters, what employers are responsible for, and how to build a sound process to protect plan information. I got an email the other day, ladies, from a company that some of my stuff got out there. So I have a lot of questions about this. It's good to see you, ladies, as always. Don, let me ask, and that's a serious comment, by the way. But Don, let me ask you, why is cybersecurity important with respect to these employee benefit plans?
Well, at today, the current value of assets inside United States retirement plan accounts is over $45 trillion. So that's counting all kinds of plans, employer plans like 401k plans, traditional pension plans, government plans for their employees, and individual retirement accounts. It's a big number, and as you know, that those dollars exist in electronic systems at investment institutions all over the country, and those systems, and there's greedy people who want to break in and grab that money. So the cybersecurity, the cyber criminals see that any plan that's holding millions of dollars in retirement assets as a juicy target for hacking and breaking into systems generally in all the different ways that they can. And cybersecurity firms are always trying to keep up with those techniques. But it's just a juicy target. That's why it's so important. And it's, of course, once the money is gone from a hack or an attack, an unauthorized withdrawal, for example, it's difficult to get it back, usually. So,
Go ahead, Kathleen.
I was just going to say that in addition to the monetary sort of incentive, of the money that's in the retirement plans, it's just also retirement plans and health plans are just a wealth of information that helps with identity theft too. So that's another aspect that these are sort of target-rich, plans.
Yeah, the term is personal identifying information, PII, is valuable to cyber criminals as well for posing as a person. So at PII, the Social Security number, address, date of birth, a full name, address, as I said, address, all these things can be used to pose as a person for identity theft as well.
Along those lines, and Kathleen kind of mentioned a couple of them, but Don, is it just retirement and health plans that are the most vulnerable to cybersecurity threats with employees? Are there other things that we're not thinking about?
There's probably other things that I don't know the details about. For example, any financial transaction, any business or institution that's holding or conducting financial assets, conducting transactions in financial assets, would be a target for the same, presumably similar techniques that would be used for retirement plans. So if your retirement plan is holding, it transmits its deferrals, for example, and all of its other plan contributions to an account at a provider such as Fidelity or Vanguard or Empower, these big names in retirement plans, those institutions do conduct trades, and they also have other kinds of investments that have nothing to do with retirement plans, right? They also have you conduct trades for people who are just saving in after-tax accounts as well. So presumably those accounts are under threat as well for cybersecurity, definitely.
Let me ask you along these lines, how is it being enforced right now with respect to cybersecurity enforcement with these employee benefit plans? How's it regulated? How's it enforced?
It's a really good question. The Department of Labor is in charge of this aspect of retirement plan enforcement. And they've been leaning hard into this for the past at least 10, 15 years. It's a focus in talks that Department of Labor representatives give in the industry, focus in discussions of plan audits, which are the financial audits that are required to be prepared for larger plans. That's plans that have at least 100 participants. And they may not be so large. Some plans have 10,000 participants, but there's a threshold at 100 where a plan needs to provide a financial audit, and the financial audit needs to be accompanied by a cybersecurity certification as well. And so the rules for audits, are created by the Department of Labor, include having a cybersecurity, they call it a Systems and Operation Control, a SOC, SOC. A SOC 2 is the cybersecurity SOC. The SOC 1 is the financial control SOC. But both of those reports are required for a large plan audit. Where the sort of gears and wheels of cybersecurity are inside that financial institution that's holding the plan investments. But the employer is ultimately responsible under ERISA, under the federal law governing plans, and the Department of Labor goes to the employer to ensure that their systems, that they're aware of the systems that are in place at their financial institution and are overseeing it.
Well, and I was just going to also add from the health plan perspective that the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, which is part of I believe it's part of the Health and Human Services, but they are now doing HIPAA audits of health plans. So it can come from, mainly the DOL, as Dahl said, but also it's an issue for other governmental agencies like the Office of Civil Rights. So.
Mm. That is good to know. That's interesting. So let me ask you then, Dahl, what are some of the best practices that these employers should start putting in place for protecting the benefit plan data?
This is the generic advice that every person who uses a computer to handle their own finances, the sort of consumer advice, applies to retirement plans as well, that you should not trust emails from somebody that you don't know or that seem unfamiliar, even if they are from somebody that you do know. And so when I say you, I'm talking about you as a plan participant interacting with your plan account for your own purposes, or you as an employee of an employer who's got a plan and you've got control over the plan assets by transmitting deferrals or something, or you inside a service provider handling the plan assets on behalf of the big institutional investor. Anybody who uses an email in connection with a plan account should be very careful about using that email, because the biggest weakness still for ordinary day-to-day draining of retirement assets by crooks is still using phishing emails to provide the opportunity, like links, for example, for the cyber criminals to get into a system using a link. And then once they're in a system, they can then wreak havoc with the money inside the system. And that exposure to it's email, it's still very, it's a very serious exposure, because people fall prey to these apparent innocent emails, and they click a link and they don't realize that has permitted the bad guys into the door of their account or their plan.
I was also just going to kind of reinforce that plan sponsors need to, maybe encrypt emails. That's a important thing. And the other sort of aspect that plan sponsors are really supposed to pay attention to is basically what the service providers that they hire do, making sure that they have, they have a contract which, forces the service provider to have good practices to protect their electronic information, and to go through a certain process of maintaining an overview of those service providers. That's very important.
Yeah, I think that selecting the service provider is the point at which the employer of any size has the opportunity to quiz the provider on things like cybersecurity protocols. What happens? Do they ever audit their systems or, test their systems for weakness? What do they have a recent SOC 2 report that they might have provided to a large plan provider that is really just their procedures and practices internally inside the institutional investment company to protect the data. And even a small employer who doesn't have to have that SOC 2 report attached to their plan filings is interacting with institutional investors who do have to provide that report for larger clients. So there's an industry out there with reputable providers doing very good work in cybersecurity inside their institutions. The employer should make sure they don't try to select an institution that doesn't have adequate cybersecurity. I'm not quite sure. I've never run across that, but maybe there would be an institutional investor that would be not reputable, not doing a good job with cybersecurity, and it's up to the employer to find that out.
And I was just hearing from representatives, former representatives of the DOL talk on this, and they're really focusing on governance and accountability, which is the cybersecurity practices and the documentation of what they are, and risk assessment and what they call validation, which is there an annual risk assessment performed? Is vulnerability testing done? How do they remediate a breach? How do they reduce vulnerabilities? Do they have two-factor authentication? What are their operational controls, data recovery? Is there a disaster process in place? And Dal, I don't know if you mentioned this, but there in 2021 there was DOL EBSA guidance on what they expect as the best practices, and you know, it's sort of both detailed and yet not enough. So
Well, it squarely puts the burden on the employer to hold the providers accountable in connection with their own internal systems of cybersecurity, which is fair. The employers may not have a lot of control over those systems, but they should ask questions about them and ask for things like stress testing of the system and things that they can ask about. They should get answers to that are satisfying. But the main one of the main lists of requirements that the Department of Labor issued in 2021 was very much a plan participant level training that participants should be encouraged to have two-factor authentication on their own participant retirement accounts. So when they log into their portal for their plan to change investments or seek a withdrawal or whatever it is, they have to not just log on with a password. They should be changing passwords frequently. They should have two factors, so that sharing passwords is a bad practice. They shouldn't share their password with anybody. These are things that consumers are advised all the time, and it's a perfect example of just basic garden variety cybersecurity that affects us in so many areas of our life, also applied to our retirement savings, and much more so, because they're so important.
I was just going to add that on the EBSA website, that's the Employee Benefits Security Administration, on their website, they actually have a list of what questions to ask regarding cybersecurity. So that's good for plan sponsors and participants as well.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of stuff. And I love what you're saying, Dal, about, hey, you do these things already in your daily life, right? Employers should be doing the same thing. So along those lines, as we kind of wrap here, though, let me ask you, and Dal, I'll turn to you first, and Kathleen, you can chime in. Where would you advise an employer to get help establishing this cybersecurity process that really aligns with the benefit plan compliance requirements?
I would go to what Kathleen just mentioned, the EBSA website, and look for all the different sort of public service announcements and materials they have for plan sponsors in connection with cybersecurity, including the list of questions to ask their provider. So, for example, years ago when this first came to my attention that the DOL was starting to ask pointed questions about cybersecurity inside investigations of retirement plans. I went to a steady client and said, Do you know what your provider, who's a big institutional provider in the country with about maybe $50 million in assets this plan has?" I asked the client, "Do you know what they do, what their security is?" There is a plan audit required, but I myself wasn't up to snuff on it, years ago. And we talked to the provider, and they gave us all kinds of information. They gave us kind of a training, the client and me, on what their security systems were and how they dealt with breaches, how they tested their systems, all of the good stuff. So that was great, but, to do that if you have an ERISA attorney, have them help you. But also there is really good information on the Employee Benefits Security and Administration website for employers on lots of topics, including cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Kathleen, anything to add on that?
Just that it was recommended when I recently went to a conference on this topic that if there is a breach, if within 36 hours, the first 36 hours after a breach, plan sponsors should go and contact the FBI at ic3.gov. And that's supposed to get them, the time is of the essence. So that's very, how quickly you get some legal process to protect the assets as quick as possible. And the FBI actually has that website available for that. So that's a really good resource.
Yeah. No, it's great stuff. It's great insights as always. Ladies, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to this installment of Employee Benefit Plans and Business Sense. If you need added guidance on strengthening your benefit plan cybersecurity practices, do me a favor right now. Visit klblawgroup.com to connect with Dahl or Kathleen. And be sure to like, subscribe, leave a review, comment. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.